Hi, I'm Noga Arbel and I'm the Israel with Channel Tov News, bringing you unfiltered truth, news and analysis from Israel. Joining me today is Advocate Ziv Maor, and we want to talk about the constitutional crisis, one of many that Israel seems to be going through today. The last Israeli Chief Justice retired 7 or 8 months ago, and to date, no one was nominated to replace her or the other 2 justices that retired in recent months. The reason for that is a deadlock in the Appointments Committee, which has flared into public discord again a few days ago when the head of the Israeli Bar Association announced in a space interview on X that he was giving that he has been deliberately preventing the appointment of judges he does not agree with politically. To Americans, that might make sense, but did you notice that the head of the Israeli Bar Association has influence? He actually has 2 representatives in the appointment committee. No other association and actually no other group of people is represented in the committee except for judges and lawyers, which creates a very skewed system to begin with. And I've asked Advocate Maor to join us because we need to understand what the basics of the problem is and why this is becoming a crisis that will require constitutional overhaul before we continue. Ziv, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me. So I'd say that there are 2 things that our English-speaking, more to topic American viewers need to understand before approaching the issue of the Israeli legal crisis, constitutional crisis, or legal situation as a whole. First of all, we do not have a constitution. Now, kudos to all the Jewish lawyers in the States that do great job to their customers. Now, for you guys, let's think for a moment what would it be like to be a lawyer in the States without the concept of constitution. It's a whole new language. Someone not long ago compared between the Apple and iPhone operating system to the Android operating system. It's not the same. It's like comparing the Apple operating system with the operating system of a scientific calculator. It's completely different. It's a completely different approach. It is much more limited. And the essence of those limits lie in the fact that what a healthy legal system does, quite similar to the iPhone operating system, is creates a framework. It creates a set of questions that no one needs to ask because everybody knows the answer to. For instance, you cannot use a mouse with your iPhone. You can only use your touchscreen. This is how the system works. The Constitution and the legal system as a whole does the same. There are certain questions that everybody either knows the answer to or know where to look the answer at. If this is not the case, if there is an entity or an establishment that has the superiority in the sense that they can give whatever answer they want to any legal question.
And it doesn't even have to be consistent.
It doesn't have to be consistent, not about the merit itself and not about the way that the answer is being developed. For instance, in another 2 countries that has no constitutions, there are only 3 democracies in the world that has no constitution, which is us, the UK, and New Zealand. Now, the other 2 have voluntarily and decisively adopted a system that has the principle of parliamentary supremacy. Those 2 countries have decided that whatever the parliament decides supersede. So other countries without constitution have decided that there is a principle of parliamentary supremacy. Here we have a different principle, which is judicial supremacy. Now,
but did we ever decide that?
No, that's the point. Because you can say that the English also didn't decide about parliamentary supremacy at their place, but it was analyzed and identified by scholars in the early 19th century, and the New Zealanders have positively decided so. They have made decision, they have a constitutional decision, they have no constitution, but they have a basic law that stipulates that there is a parliamentary supremacy. Now here, not only that we have de facto judicial supremacy, but there are 2 things that needs to be noted. First of all, we did not decide so. This was the decision of the justices to take this power from the people from the individuals who were elected by the masses to basically take over government. And the second thing to be understood that when you think about political science as its core, the profiles of the three branches of government, the three branches of power. This is not what the judiciary is supposed to do. You can ask in a healthy democracy which branch should be stronger, the legislative or the executive. The idea, the concept that the judiciary, which by definition, according to Montesquieu and the Federalist, must be passive, by definition, will actually hold the final power, the final decision, goes against everything that we know about democracy and about the separation of powers. And this is the reality that we currently have. So we did not choose it, we don't elect it, we did not decide so, and this goes against the very most basic insights and definitions of a healthy democracy and a healthy polity. This is where we live. But Noga, this is not even the most fundamental issue. The most fundamental problem that we currently have, that the justices that have took this power simply do not consider themselves to be subordinated to the law. The American Constitution, for instance, says that the court will operate under the law. The law is above them, according to the letter of the Constitution. And we have the same principle in Israel. We have a basic law that decides and defines the limitations of the power of the justices, and they say explicitly that they are subordinate to the law. This is a basic law, which is the closest thing that we do have to a constitution. The justices simply do not bind to that. They do whatever they want. If they have a case that have a certain political consequence, that they will interpret the law in one way, and if the same case arises and brings up a different set of political consequences, they may decide the other way. Now, if the Knesset sees this, say, okay, this is injustice. These are justices that cross the boundaries and the limitations of their, I wouldn't say constitution, because we don't have...
It's no longer the rule of law, because it's supposed to apply to everyone equally, and if it applies to different people differently, it's not the rule of law, it's the rule of the judge.
Yeah, and we had an instance of this nature not so long ago. So back in the early 1990s, Justice Aaron Barak have decided that he as justice has the right to decide what is a probable decision of the government. So it is completely his job to decide what is legal. But what if something is legal, is within the authorization of the law for the government to do something, but Aaron Barak or any other justice for that matter thinks that it is legal but unreasonable, makes no sense whatsoever. What can he do? There are two answers to that. First of all, you are citizens, go vote against this government. This is your civil right.
I'm sorry, there's another answer?
Yes, there is another answer that is accepted and makes sense in other entities.
Which is? In
certain instances, which are by definition extreme, justices often do in other countries things that are either explicitly or implicitly illegal and say, yes, the government is authorized to do so, but I rule against it. Because the justice understands that it is not only he who thinks that the action at hand is ludicrous, it is the entire public. And when justices do so, and the public is silent against the justices, this means that even though this was not a legal decision, the public accepted it, endorsed it. No one, for instance, in Israel, there is a cliche that says, what if the Knesset, our parliament, decides tomorrow morning to legislate the legitimate slaughter of all the gingers? What if the Knesset decides so? The answer is it will never do so, and there is no precedent, not in Israel, in the entire history of democracy for a similar decision. There is not a single one. Example in the history of democracy, of a democracy that committed suicide.
A functioning democracy that decided to assassinate its...
Some say that there are two examples, both in France, 1851, giving the power to Napoleon III, and 1930, giving the power to Pétain. These are the two examples that are the closest for a democratic decision from a democratically elected...
By the populace.
By the populace, a legitimate decision to no longer be a democracy.
Okay.
But I go back to our justices. Sometimes justices rule against the law. I'll give you a very interesting example. So many legal systems, Israel is included in this, have a bottom or a limitation on how small can a punishment be for the felony of murder. So, for instance, if minimum sentencing. In Israel, if you are convicted with murder, you can only be sentenced for 20 years or more. Now, let's take the instance that is unfortunately not rare enough of a wife that lived for 20 years with a brutal husband, with abusive husband who molested her and was violent towards her. And she is convicted with his murder. And the justice decides not to give her 20 years, but to give her 2 years. No one will resent this decision, even though it is illegal. So this is a case where, for instance, the probability that goes against the letter of the law in the minds of a judge can be considered as legitimate by the public. In such case, and this happens even in Israel, and it happens all over the world, it is okay. But what is unique to Israel, what Aaron Barak did in this 30 years old decision, is it basically expanded the limits of probability. No longer a justice is allowed to supersede the law in an extreme circumstance when the justice predicts that the public will accept it with silence, but when the enlightened segment of the public thinks otherwise than the public itself, then you end up with a situation when the decision of the judge supersedes not the law, but the decision of the public. And this is the definition of tyranny.
Yes. And I guess what the problem is really that Israelis, more than others, have this tendency to believe that when we dictate to others what to do, we are doing good. For some reason, that the basic understanding of what liberty is, which is that, or how you increase liberty, is lost on us. And there are fun aspects to it because everybody is in everybody's business and there's a lot of help on a communal level. But when you put that, it's like, this is our lack of separation between church and state. Community, where your mom gets to tell you what to wear and where to go to sleep, even if you're 45, that's a good thing. Mm-hmm. But if you were to legislate that all mothers could dictate to all sons at 45 that when to go to sleep and what to eat, that is no longer a community, that is a dictatorship. And I think what our problem is that we have a problem drawing that line. But yeah. I want to take you back to how we elect judges.
Yeah.
We're now stuck because we can't really elect judges. Why is that?
First of all, once we have defined the problem, that the core problem, the core issue is that justices do not consider themselves subordinate to the law and are not committed to execute the law with their decisions, then the conclusion that you get from it, that the question of who is the judge is way more critical than it is in other countries where you can have a dispute, and Americans are not a stranger whatsoever to disputes about the identity of Supreme Justices and of justices in general. But
also, you have back and forth. In the United States, it took 50 years, but they eventually changed the makeup of the Supreme Court.
Yeah.
In Israel, the way that the system is set up, you won't ever be able to do that because we don't have elected officials choosing the judges. We have judges and lawyers.
So this is way more important than the equivalent questions in other polities. Basically, when you say that the justice is above the law, the justice is sovereign. And it is critical to understand this. So what happened before the war is that the Israeli elected government had decided to tackle the fact that justices are not subordinate to the law. This was the core issue with the reform. Many elements within the law itself, are designed to make the justices obey and execute the law in their decisions. Unfortunately, there has been a rebellion, a mutiny among the minority of Israeli citizens, and this reform have failed. A violent one, and this reform have failed.
So far.
Yeah, it has failed so far. It might re-erect, but this is the situation where we are at right now. And currently we're facing the critical of how to reman the Supreme Court of Israel. So, as we've mentioned earlier,
because we have a 15 people bench. 3 are missing. One of them is the Supreme Court. Is the Supreme Justice.
And one more thing to understand, that the functionality of the Supreme Justice in Israel is also way more important than its equivalent in the States, because in the States, all the justices sit on each and every case that they communally decide to take and discuss. In Israel, first of all, every case that is being filed to the Supreme Court must be deliberated, and it is not. It is very rarely being deliberated by the entire tribunal.
We only had one case where the entire tribunal.
Yeah, not so long ago. I think there was also one in the 50s, but don't catch me on this word. But at least one in the past 40 years, not more than that.
The point is that it's a very important position.
Yes, and the functionality that decides which justice sits at which case is the Supreme Justice, and is supposed, according to the letter of the law, to do it randomly. But when you look back at the nature of the cases, which justices get the more high-profile cases that deal with constitutional issues or with the conflict against justices,
it's a very random.
It is not random. It is according to the outcome. It is not random. It is being decided. The justice. There is a tradition among Israeli Supreme Justices to break the law and to distribute cases not in a random manner, but in a random that will design a more desirable outcome.
And there's no function to supervise or impeach judges.
Yeah.
And the only people who can impeach the judges are the judges.
The judges and the committee itself, by the way. According to that of the law, this has never happened in Israel a single time.
But we have a 9-person election committee that is made up of 3 judges, 2 representatives of the Bar Association, which is absurd, and then
3 representatives of the majority, and 1 in the Knesset, and 1 representative of the minority. So basically, the majority, which represents the
majority of the committee, are not elected.
It's more important than that. So traditionally in Israel, because we don't have the privileges that the Americans have, even through a very long scale of time, to switch the balance in the Supreme Court. So you have a tradition in Israel that the justices are aligned with the left. So we have.
Although the point of having this committee in the first place was that it would be professional.
Yeah.
We have judges and lawyers there, not because they represent the will of the people, but because we want to choose neutral, unbiased, professional judges.
Well, it makes sense. For instance, if I have to decide which doctor will have me in surgery, I know so little about the science and occupation of medicine that I will have no tools to evaluate the person in front of me. So I will ask another doctor to tell me something about the doctor that I'm considering as a candidate. It makes sense to have a very senior justice of the Supreme Court to decide and to evaluate the professionality and the adaptivity of candidates for this position.
I think it made sense, but when you look at the practice of it, the notion of professionalism in of itself is changing. And what we see more and more is that you don't test whether someone knows the law. In Israel, you don't need to know the law. The judge is the law. So the only thing you ask is whether or not this person is aligned with my political views. And that goes against the grain of what democracy is supposed to be. Because the question isn't whether the judge is aligned with other judges. The question is whether all the judges are aligned with the wishes of the people that they serve. And I don't think Israeli justices have that sense of service anymore.
No, that's a very crucial point, because now we get into their psychic, which is something that needs to be understood. You can think about a very bad person, an evil person that sits in a room and decides, okay, how can I gain more power? How can I become more powerful and to absorb and to concentrate more power?
I think it also has to do with the way that the system is constructed. I mean, we keep appointing judges or justices that we think are conservative, but the way that the system is constructed
means that
they're no longer conservative.
No, they are. That's the point. Because what is an activist judge is something who believes ideologically, out of goodwill, that his faith, his set of values needs to be, his own set of values needs to be expressed in his decisions, and this is why he was elected judge. And the conservative justice think exactly the other way. He says, my personal opinion on the matter, my political opinion on the matter is completely irrelevant. So
when you put activist judges and conservative judges together,
the activists will always win because they have weapons, so to speak.
So let's see if we can wrap it up. We're at the moment we at the moment have a really big problem because the head of the Bar Association has admitted to violating one of the basic sacred rules of this committee, which the judicial reform was supposed to overhaul in the first place. And we have a justice minister, who is refusing to even convene. He has the right to convene.
He has the legal right to decide whether or not to convene. So there is a majority against him, but he decides because of the majority, because of the participated outcome of the voting, he says, okay, you're not going to vote at all.
And that's the only power that elected officials in Israel have left, because the elected officials are at a minority in the judicial committee.
No, this should be understood, because it's not the elected officials. If the elected officials, if the majority voted for a leftist government, there is a majority. No, because I don't care about the establishments, and I don't care about the individuals. I care about the ideas. And the core of democracy is that I, as a citizen, have the right to have a segment of my ideology being expressed in the government actions. So given that, and this is a fact, that the Supreme Court is always aligned with the left, according to a tradition, according to the fact that we cannot really change this. And the lawyers, by the way, are always aligned not with the left, but with the justices, because they work with them, and their entire career is dependent. So you have a majority to lawyers and justices, and the justices are aligned with the left. That means you have a supermajority and an eternal majority to the left. Now, if the government is the left,
it's also an explanation to why there are more lawyers per person in Israel. It's another explanation.
Yeah.
More lawyers per person in Israel than anywhere else in the world, because
first of all, it's because we're
Jewish. Yeah. But okay, so we have an automatic majority for unelected officials, eternal majority for unelected officials, and we have an even larger automatic majority for one point of view. And all of this in a committee that is supposed to be unbiased and is now actively, publicly admitting this isn't their bias, and that's where we're stuck.
Yeah.
That's where we're stuck, because we have a justice minister who says, I'm not playing ball anymore. Yeah. The people of Israel will no longer be subject to their judges. And as long as that is the way the committee is constructed, and as long as the committee is determined not to allow views other than that of its members to be expressed, we want democracy back, which means we can't have a professional committee. Professionalism has gone wildly awry. We need a democratic committee. We need reform.
We need politicization, which is a very heavy word. I will address it in a moment, but there is one crucial thing that also needs to be understood. When the member of the bar, the head of the bar, declared that he dictated to his representatives in the committee who to elect and who to block, I can think of at least 2 criminal felonies that he committed that goes to the extent that it nullifies previous decisions of the committee. But in order to get this legal outcome, you have to go through what?
The legal system.
Through a court, through the same, you have to appeal to the Supreme Court. In Israel, when it comes to administrative law, you don't have circuit courts of the kind that you have in the States. The first and last tribunal that you face is the Supreme Court, is the same justices for which those members of the bar, representatives of the bar, work. So you have no way to enforce the law in a country where justices have decided that the law does not bind them.
We have a previous president who used to call them it roughly translates to the rule of law gang, because it's not rule, it's not law, but it is a gang.
Yeah.
It's people who are abusing their authority in order to basically to subjugate their fellow citizens, and it's definitely not democratic in any way.
It's sometimes ridiculous, and it's mostly said, and this is the currently the disformed version of democracy that we have.
It's a disformed version of rule. It's not democracy.
Yeah.
If you do not accept the basic tenets that the people have a right to set their own rules, then what we have here right now may need a new name. We call it Euristocracy. We call it Euristocracy, but it's not even that. It's something way worse, way more pernicious, that is going to be, that we're going to have to address very, very soon. This is all the time we have today.
That's that. I want 5 more minutes to explain to our American viewers how did we get to this point, because it's crucial to understand.
I think we're going to have you here again.
Let's have another session. Okay.
They're
saying that we must have. Okay. YouTube is going to kill us on that.
YouTube is going to cut us off any second now. So it's all the time we have today. I really, really want you to come again.
Sure.
Advocate Ziv Maor, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
And thank you very, very much for tuning in. If you like the content, please share, subscribe, and come again.